It is late, and the world outside your window has finally gone quiet. The last car door has slammed somewhere down the street. The last dog has stopped barking, and the house has settled into that soft, creaking rhythm that old buildings make when they are breathing in the dark. You are lying down now, or perhaps you are sitting somewhere comfortable, wrapped in a blanket, with a cup of tea gone lukewarm beside you. And if you are ready, I would like to take you somewhere very far away, somewhere so vast and so empty that the night is not just a time of day, but a whole country of its own. Somewhere the sand stretches out in slow golden waves, and the stars hang so low you could almost reach up and stir them with your finger. We are going to the Sahara Desert, to the country of Mali, and to a road that is not really a road at all. It is a line drawn across the sand by thousands of pounding feet, a path that has been walked, or rather walked upon by camels, for more than 1,000 years. It is the route of the salt caravans, the great annual journey that brings salt from the deep, terrible heart of the desert to the cities on its edge. And we are going to follow it, but not during the blinding heat of the day. No, we are going to follow it at night, when the desert cools, when the sky opens up like a vast dark tent, and when the only sounds are the jingling of camel bells and the soft, endless whispering of the wind. Let us ease ourselves into this story slowly. Let us first imagine the desert itself, because the desert is the true main character of this tale. The Sahara is enormous, larger than the continent of Australia, a sea of sand and stone and rock that stretches from the Atlantic Ocean in the west to the Red Sea in the east. It is not all rolling dunes, though the dunes are the part that most of us picture. There are also vast plains of gravel called Reg, and plateaus of black rock called Hamada, and dry riverbeds that have not seen water in thousands of years. It is a place of extremes, where the temperature can climb past 120 degrees in the afternoon, and then plunge close to freezing by the early hours of the morning. And it is in that morning cold, that strange, shivering chill that creeps across the desert before dawn, that the caravans have always found their freedom, because the heat of the day is not just uncomfortable, it is deadly. It is the kind of heat that can drain a man of water in a matter of hours, that can make the air shimmer and dance until you cannot trust your eyes, that can bake the moisture out of a camel's body and leave it stumbling and weak. So the traders learned long ago to move when the sun was down. They learned to rest in the shade of their tents during the white-hot afternoons, and to load their animals as the long shadows stretched across the dunes. And as the last band of orange faded from the western sky, they would set out into the cool dark, following the stars like a map written in silver ink. To understand what the salt caravans carried, and why they carried it at all, we have to think about something we mostly take for granted. Salt, that white, crystalline mineral that sits in a little pot on our kitchen counters, that we sprinkle over our food without a second thought. But in the ancient world, and in West Africa for many hundreds of years, salt was worth its weight in gold. Literally, it was traded ounce for ounce in some markets, And the reason is simple. The human body needs salt to survive, especially in a hot climate. When you sweat, you lose salt. When you lose too much, you become weak, confused, and eventually you collapse. So people living in the hot, humid lands of West Africa, south of the desert, where salt is scarce, and the rivers run fresh, and the gardens grow thick with green things, they craved salt the way we might crave water on a dry day. But where do you find salt in West Africa? Not in the rainforests, not along the great Niger River, not in the green grasslands of the Sahel. No, the salt is found out there, in the middle of one of the most inhospitable places on earth. In the deep Sahara, at a place called Taoudeni, there lies a great salt bed, a vast flat pan of pure white crystal that has been mined for 1,000 years. It is so remote that even today, with all our maps and GPS satellites, it is a long and difficult journey to reach it. The salt sits there in enormous slabs, cut out of the ground like great glass bricks. And for centuries, the only way to get it out was by camel. And so, there arose a trade route. It was not a trade route of spices or silk or gold, though gold did travel along it. It was, in many ways, a trade route of necessity, of survival. The salt had to come out of Taoudeni, and it had to go to the cities of the south, to Timbuktu, and from there to the villages and towns that lined the Niger River. And the journey was, and still is, one of the longest and most difficult commercial ventures on the planet. For a modern truck driver, a long haul might be 1,000 miles on a smooth highway. For the salt caravans, the journey was roughly 500 miles. But those 500 miles were across open desert, with no road, no gas station, no repair shop, and no rescue service. Only the track, the stars, and the knowledge that had been passed down from father to son for generations. Now, let us not rush ahead. Let us stop here for a moment, in the cool of the night, and consider the camel. Because the camel is the other great character in this story, the single-humped dromedary, the ship of the desert, the animal that made this entire enterprise possible. The camel is, by all accounts, a strange and somewhat grumpy creature. It has a long, curved neck, a face that looks permanently unimpressed, and legs that are so long and awkward that standing up is a complicated 4-part process that looks a bit like a piece of furniture being unfolded. It grumbles and groans, and sometimes spits when it is annoyed, which is often. But it is also a masterpiece of biological engineering. A camel can go for days, even weeks, without water. It can lose up to 1/4 of its body weight in fluid and keep walking, something that would kill almost any other mammal. Its hump is not a water tank, as people sometimes think, but a store of fat that can be drawn upon when food is scarce. Its nostrils can close almost completely to keep out blowing sand. It has long eyelashes and a third, translucent eyelid that works like a pair of built-in goggles. Its feet are broad and flat, spreading out on the soft sand, so it does not sink the way a horse would. And it can carry enormous loads, sometimes more than 300 pounds, for miles and miles and miles, day after day, across terrain that would destroy any wheeled vehicle. But the camel is not fast. It ambles along at a slow, rolling walk, maybe 2 or 3 miles an hour, and it does not like to be hurried. This is part of why the salt caravans are so slow, so patient, and so perfectly suited to the night. A caravan moves at the pace of a camel, and a camel moves at the pace of the desert, which is to say, it moves in a steady, tireless rhythm, like a slow tide going out. There is no drama in a camel's walk, no urgency, no rush. There is just the endless, hypnotic swaying of its body, the soft padding of its feet in the sand, and the gentle clinking of the bells that hang from its neck. And when you fall asleep to the sound of a camel caravan passing, you drift off to a rhythm that has been lulling Sahara travelers to sleep for centuries. Let us return now to the beginning of the journey. We are in Timbuktu, the fabled city of gold, the market town at the southern edge of the desert, where the sands give way to the green floodplain of the Niger River. The city in the old days was a wonder. It was a city of mud brick buildings, of great mosques with towering minarets, of crowded markets where traders from the north met traders from the south, where the air smelled of spices and dried fish and the sweet smoke of cooking fires. It was a city where scholars gathered to copy manuscripts by lamplight, where the university libraries held thousands of books on astronomy, mathematics, and law. And it was the dream of every young merchant to one day make the journey north to Taoyuideni, to bring back the salt in triumph. But before we join the caravan, let us talk about what it took to prepare for such a journey. This was not a casual trip. It was a serious expedition, and it began months before the actual departure. The caravans would typically leave in the autumn, after the worst of the summer heat had passed, and when the night skies were clear and the days were still warm enough to melt the salt from the mines. The merchants would need to assemble a string of camels, sometimes 100, sometimes 200, sometimes more. Each camel had to be healthy, well-fed, and accustomed to the heavy, swinging loads. The salt blocks themselves were cut at the mine in the winter, when the digging was easier, and stacked in great white piles to wait. The journey itself would take, in the old days, anywhere from 20 to 40 days, depending on the weather, the condition of the animals, and the luck of the travelers. It was a journey of roughly 600 miles, round trip, across some of the most featureless terrain on Earth. There were landmarks, yes. The caravanners knew the way by the shapes of certain dunes, by the position of certain stars, by the feel of the wind. But to an outsider, the desert looks like a featureless ocean of sand, and getting lost is a terrifying and completely real possibility. There are stories of entire caravans vanishing, swallowed by the desert, their bones found years later, half buried in the drifting sand. But we will not get lost tonight, because we have guides, we have the stars, and we have a good sense of how the salt caravans crossed the Sahara at night. In that great silence, under that great roof of darkness. Let me take you there now, on a particular night, perhaps 150 years ago, though it could just as easily be 1,000 years ago, because the rhythm of the caravan did not change much over the centuries. Imagine that we are standing at the edge of Timbuktu as the sun goes down. The sky is turning from blue to a deep, bruised purple, and the first stars are appearing, faint at first, then brighter as the light drains away. The air is cooling. The wind, which has been blowing hot and dry all day, begins to soften. Somewhere in the town, a call to prayer rises and falls away. In the market, the last of the day's sellers are packing their goods, folding their cloths, loading their donkeys. And out on the edge of the settlement, by a cluster of low tents, the camels are being loaded. There is an art to loading a camel. You cannot simply throw a bundle on its back and call it done. The loads must be balanced, carefully, evenly, so that the animal does not tilt or chafe or develop sores. The salt blocks are heavy, dense, and they are packed in leather bags or tied with ropes of camel hide. The camel driver, a man with a sun-darkened face and a long blue robe, works quickly and calmly. He talks to his animals in a low voice, a continuous stream of soft, soothing nonsense, because camels like to be talked to. They are, as I mentioned, highly opinionated creatures. They sulk when they are ignored. So the driver murmurs, and the camel grumbles back, and together they sort out the business of the load. By the time the loading is done, the night is fully upon them. The stars are out in their thousands, and there is no moon, which is good. The darkness is a friend to the caravan, because the cool air helps the camels lose less water, and the absence of light makes the distances feel less cruel. The driver lights a small lantern, just a tin can with a flame, and hangs it from the lead camel's neck. This is not to see by, not really, because the stars provide enough light for the track. It is to signal, to let the other camels know where the leader is, and to let other travelers know that a caravan is passing. Then, with a click of the tongue and a gentle tug on the rope, the lead camel stands up. It is a process, as I said, that looks like a piece of furniture being unfolded. Back legs first, then front legs, with much groaning. Then the second camel stands, and the third, and soon the whole long line is on its feet, a string of dark shapes swaying gently against the star-filled sky. Someone calls out, a soft, sing-song call in a language you do not understand. There is a jingle of bells, a creak of saddles, and the caravan begins to move. It moves slowly at first, the camels finding their rhythm, their wide feet settling into the sand in a steady, patient rhythm. The driver walks beside his lead camel, his lantern swinging. The other men walk along the line, checking the loads, adjusting the ropes, talking to the animals. And within an hour, the lights of Timbuktu have disappeared behind them, and there is only the desert, and the night, and the long line of camels swaying like boats on a slow, dark sea. Now, here is where the story becomes truly quiet, truly peaceful, and I want you to settle into that quietness with me. Because the rest of this journey, the night after night after night, was not filled with adventure or danger. It was filled with the opposite. It was filled with sameness, with repetition, with the slow, grinding rhythm of walking through sand. The caravan would travel for most of the night, stopping only at around 8 or 9 in the morning, when the sun was beginning to bite. Then the men would set up camp, a ring of tents in the lee of a dune, and they would sleep through the heat of the day. They would wake in the late afternoon, eat a little food, drink a little water, and prepare for the next night's march. And so it went, one night following another, the stars turning overhead in their slow, majestic circles, the constellation of Orion rising in the east, then climbing, then setting in the west. The North Star, fixed and steady, a sentinel over the whole desert. The men navigated by these stars, not with instruments, but with pure knowledge, the kind of knowledge that lives in the bones. They knew which star would rise over the shoulder of a certain dune. They knew when to turn by a few degrees to avoid a soft patch of sand. They knew, from the feel of the wind and the color of the sky, when a storm was coming. And they knew these things not because they had read them in books, but because their fathers had taught them, and their grandfathers, and so on back into the deep mystery of time. In the early hours of the night, the desert is still warm. The sand holds the heat of the day, and it radiates up into the air like a gentle breath. You smell dust and dry earth and the strong animal smell of the camels. The camel bells make a low, sweet music, not melodic exactly, but strangely soothing, like wind chimes in a distant garden. The men do not talk much. They walk or they ride, with their heads wrapped in their turbans against the cold that will come later, and they watch the stars. As the night goes on, the cold creeps in. The desert loses its heat quickly, and by 3 in the morning, you are shivering in your robes, even though you are wrapped in a heavy woolen blanket. The camels blow warm steam from their nostrils, and the men rub their hands together and drink tiny sips of sweet tea from a shared tin cup. The tea is strong, almost syrupy, and it is the only thing that keeps the cold at bay. The stars seem to sharpen in the cold air. The Milky Way is a great bright river across the black sky, so dense with stars that it looks like spilled cream. And if you lie down on the sand, just for a moment, and look straight up, you can feel the whole earth tilting beneath you, turning slowly, carrying you and the camels and the entire caravan on its long, gentle journey through space. There is a particular moment just before dawn that the caravanners know well. It is the moment when the sky begins to change, not with light, but with a kind of vague luminance at the horizon. The stars fade, not all at once, but one by one, like lamps being extinguished in a distant city. The black sky becomes a deep navy blue, then a paler blue, then a band of orange and peach spreads along the eastern edge. The air is cold and still and absolutely quiet. The camels seem to sense that the march is nearly over for the night. They pick up their pace just slightly, and the bells ring a little faster. And the caravan reaches its campsite in the shadow of a dune, just as the first direct rays of the sun touch the top of a distant rise. The men unload the camels, feed them, water them, and then they crawl into their tents and pull their blankets over their heads and sleep. And the desert grows hot, The temperature climbs. The sand becomes too hot to touch. Nothing moves except the wind, and the wind does not cool. It only burns. The salt caravan sleeps through it all, hidden from the sun, waiting for the evening, waiting for the cool, waiting for the stars to come back out and call them to their feet again. Let us dwell for a moment on the strange intimacy of traveling at night with animals. When you spend weeks crossing the desert with camels, you come to know them individually. You know the one who is stubborn, who refuses to stand without being coaxed. You know the one who is skittish, who startles at shadows. You know the one who is old, whose legs are stiff, who plods along at the very back and needs extra encouragement. The men give their camels names, and they speak to them constantly, in a low, affectionate murmuring that is half language, half music. And the camels, in their grumpy way, respond. They lean their long necks toward their drivers. They allow themselves to be stroked. They even seem to take comfort in the presence of the men, because the desert is as lonely and frightening for a camel as it is for a person, though a camel would never admit it. The relationship is ancient. It goes back to a time when the Sahara was not a desert at all, but a green and pleasant land, full of rivers and lakes and grazing animals. And there, in that old green world, people first tamed the wild camels and learned to use them and carried them out into the drying land until the two of them, human and camel, were bound together in the long survival story of the greatest desert on earth. There's a kind of trance that comes over you when you travel at night. The rhythm of the walking, the sound of the bells, the endless shimmering of the stars, all of it combines to create a dreamlike state that is neither fully awake nor fully asleep. The caravanners call it the desert sleep, a kind of waking dream in which the miles pass without notice, and your mind drifts freely into memory and imagination. Perhaps you think of your home, your family, the children you left behind. Perhaps you think of the market in Timbuktu, the crowds, the haggling, the moment when you will sell your salt and receive your gold. Perhaps you think of nothing at all and simply let your mind empty out into the vast, dark silence. It is a state that is almost impossible to describe to someone who has not experienced it. The closest I can compare it to is the feeling of being a small child, awake in your bed at night, listening to your parents moving around in the next room, their voices muffled and warm. You are safe. You are being carried. You are not alone. But the salt caravan is not always so peaceful. There are storms, of course. The harmattan, the dry wind that blows from the desert, can whip the sand into clouds so thick that you cannot see your own hand in front of your face. When a storm hits, the men stop the caravan. They turn the camels away from the wind, and they crouch down, wrapping their turbans around their faces until only a slit of skin shows. The sand pounds against the wool, and the wind howls, and the world disappears entirely into a brown, choking fog. These storms can last for hours or even days. When they pass, the landscape has changed. A dune has shifted. The track is gone, and the caravan must find its way again, using the stars, using their knowledge, using their feel for the desert. there is also the danger of losing water. A caravan carries its water in leather skins, loaded on the camels, and the water is precious beyond measure. Each man is given a daily ration, and he must make it last, because there is no going back to the last well, and the next well might be a week away. The camels, of course, can go much longer without water, and this is what makes the journey possible. But the men are always thirsty. Their lips crack, their throats are dry, their urine is dark, and their eyes are sunk. And still they march, because the salt is valuable, and the gold is waiting, and the families are depending on them. Perhaps I should tell you about the wells, because the wells were the heartbeat of the desert. They were the fixed points, the islands in the ocean of sand, where the caravan would stop, sometimes for a day, sometimes for two, to drink and water the animals and rest. These wells were not elaborate. They were holes in the ground, some only a few feet deep, some requiring ropes and buckets to bring water from the cool dark below. Some had a stone lip, built by generations of travelers. Some were marked by a cairn of rocks. The water from these wells was often brackish, full of minerals, tasting of sand and earth. But to a man who had been without for 10 days, it was the sweetest liquid imaginable. The caravans had names for these wells. There was the well of the circling stars, and the well of the broken camel, and the well of the red hill. And each one was a milestone, a small victory in the long, weary arithmetic of the journey. When a caravan reached a well, there was no celebration, no shouting. There was just the quiet relief of survival, a lowering of the buckets, a long, patient troughing of the camels, and the sweet, cool sound of water being poured into a cupped hand. And then, after the rest, after the camels had drunk their fill, the caravan would set out again, leaving the well behind, heading north, into the deep, into the place where the salt waited. And now, I would like to talk about Talyudeni itself. The name is known to every caravan trader, but it is not a place of comfort. It is, in the words of one traveler, a place of dust, salt, and silence. There is no shade, no vegetation, no water, except for a few brackish wells that are more salt than fresh. The mining town, if you can call it a town, consists of a cluster of low stone huts and a vast white plain where the salt is exposed. The heat is extraordinary. Even at night, the ground radiates warmth, and the air is so dry that your skin feels like paper. And yet, people have come here for centuries, to dig the salt, to load the camels, to take the white blocks back into the world. The mining of the salt was a brutal business. The miners, many of whom were enslaved people in the old days, worked with simple hand tools, slicing the salt into slabs, cutting channels into the earth, prying the blocks up with iron bars. The salt is not a single layer. It comes in great beds, like the pages of a stone book, and a miner would cut through the softer surface layers to reach the clean, white, crystalline salt below. This salt, the good salt, the treasure salt, was cut into slabs roughly the size of a small table, heavy, dense, and so bright that they hurt your eyes in the midday sun. When a caravan arrived at Talyudeni, it was a moment of immense satisfaction. The long journey north was over. The camels were exhausted, but the loads would be lightened, the salt carried back instead of brought forward. The traders would trade, and the mines would be worked, and there was a strange, dreamlike market there in the middle of nowhere, where men sold slabs of white crystal and bought dates and grain and cloth and tea and the simple necessities of desert life. And then, after a few days or perhaps a week, the caravan would be laden again, and the long journey south would begin, with the salt stacked high on the camels' backs and the bells ringing out the same slow tune. The return journey was harder in many ways. The camels were carrying heavier loads, and the sun was rising higher, and the water had to be stretched even thinner. The nights were the same, though, the same cold, the same stars, the same trance-like walking, and the caravan would arrive at Timbuktu a month later, out of the desert, ragged and tired and triumphant, with its blocks of salt to sell at the market. The salt would be broken into smaller pieces, traded for gold, for cloth, for slaves, for anything the traders needed. And some of that salt would travel even further south, down the Niger River, into the rain forests, where it was more precious than gold itself. I want to come back to the night now, because the night is where we have been living, and where this story belongs. Let me tell you about the music of the caravan, because every caravan has a music, and it is not just the bells. It is the breathing. It is the creak of the saddles, the soft chink of the iron tools, the murmur of men talking in low voices, and very often the sound of singing. There are songs of the caravan, passed down through generations, sung in a low, nasal drone to keep time with the camels walking. The songs are not cheerful. They are slow, mournful, full of longing for water, for home, for a person left behind. But they are beautiful in their way, like the wind blowing across an empty, moonlit plain. One of the songs, I understand, has a line that goes something like this: "The night is my camel, the star is my guide, and the salt is my cargo, and the emptiness is my companion." The song repeats over and over, each verse a little different, each verse drawing the caravan deeper into the night. And the men sing it not to pass the time, but to keep the rhythm, to keep the camels calm, to keep their own spirits from dissolving into the enormous dark. There is something deeply human about this, I think. The need to make music, even in the most barren place on earth. The need to sing, not for an audience, but for oneself, and for the animals, and for the night. When I imagine the salt caravans, I do not first see the camels or the dunes or the white salt blocks. I hear the singing. I hear the low, sustained note of a man's voice carried away into the dark, answered by nothing but the wind and the bells. And I am moved by the idea that, for 1,000 years, people have crossed this wasteland, not quickly, not easily, but with patience, with faith, and with song. The world has changed. Today, you can buy salt from a shop in a shiny cardboard box for almost nothing, and never think about the journey it took to get there. The salt caravans of Mali, the great Azalai, as they are called, still run, but they are diminished. Trucks have replaced some of the camels. The demand for Taoyueni salt has fallen. And yet, the caravans still load up at night and still follow the stars and still sing the old songs into the darkness, because the salt is still there and the tradition is still alive and the desert has not yet released its hold. We will stay in the night a little longer because there are so many other things to notice. Have you ever paid attention to how the sand sounds when a camel walks through it? It is not a crunching sound. It is a soft, silken sigh, the sound of something heavy slowly sinking and then lifting. When a caravan of 100 camels walks past, it sounds like a very slow, very gentle rain falling on dry leaves. The sand is all around you. It is in your hair, in your mouth, in the collar of your shirt. It works its way into your clothing and your blankets and your dreams. And yet, after a while, you stop noticing it. You become part of the desert, and the desert becomes part of you, and the two of you settle into each other like old friends. The stars, too, are more vivid out there than anywhere else on earth. Without any artificial light, without the haze of cities, the sky is a solid canopy of stars. There are so many that it is hard to pick out the constellations, because they are just the brightest points in a sea of white. The heavens rotate slowly overhead, the way they have always rotated, and the caravanners know the turning by heart. They know that when the constellation of the hunter, Orion, has sunk below the western horizon, there is only about 2 hours left until dawn. They know that when the Pleiades are directly overhead, it is the deepest, darkest part of the night, the time when the world holds its breath. They know the pole star, Polaris, the fixed point, the anchor of the sky, and they steer by it the way a sailor steers by a lighthouse. There is a story, or perhaps more than a story, something between a legend and a truth, that in the deepest part of the night, the desert becomes a mirror. The sand reflects the stars so perfectly that the nomads say you cannot tell where the earth ends and the sky begins. If you lie down and close your eyes, you feel as though you are floating, suspended in the middle of a great, starry sphere, with no up, no down, no direction. It sounds frightening, but the caravanners say it is peaceful. It is the feeling of being held by the universe, of being a small, safe thing wrapped in the darkness. I would like to think that, if you were out there now, walking quietly beside a camel, wrapped in a woolen blanket, with the bells ringing softly and the stars wheeling above, you would find that peace too. There is nowhere to go except forward. There is nothing to do except walk. There is no one to be except yourself, as simple and as honest as the sand beneath your feet. It is not an escape from life. It is not an avoidance of the world. It is a return to something older, something that lives inside us all, the memory of a time when humans traveled by foot and lived by the sky. Now, the caravan is approaching a dune, a great curving wave of sand that blocks out the stars on the horizon. The camels begin to climb. Their legs are long and their steps are slow, and the sand shifts beneath their weight, so that for every step forward, they seem to slip half a step back. But they do not stop. They do not complain. They simply keep climbing, patient as the hours, until they reach the crest. And there, for a moment, they stand silhouetted against the starry sky, a long line of dark shapes, like a row of hills against the light. And then they descend, disappearing into the shadow on the other side, and vanish fully from view. But we can still hear them if we listen. We can hear the bells, fainter now. We can hear the low murmur of a man's voice, singing the night song. And we can hear the wind, which covers their tracks even as they make them, so that by the morning, it will be as if no one had ever passed this way at all. That is the secret of the desert. It keeps no records. It erases the past. Every journey is a first journey, and the sand holds your footprints only until the wind decides to take them back. We have been walking now together for a long while. The night is deep and cold, and we have come far from the lights of the town. Perhaps it is time to wrap ourselves a little more tightly in our blankets. Perhaps it is time to listen to the bells one more time and to let our eyes grow heavy. The caravan will march until dawn, but we do not have to march with it. We can stay here at the edge of the camp, curled up in the warm sand beside the embers of a small fire, and let the night carry us into sleep. The salt road is old. It is older than memory. It has seen the rise and fall of empires, the coming of iron, the coming of guns, the coming of trucks. Through it all, the caravan has walked. At night, under the stars, with the wind at its back, the camels swaying, the men humming their old, sad songs. It is still walking. Even now, as you lie in your bed, somewhere in the world, the men of the desert are loading their camels. The bells are ringing. The sand is whispering. The journey is still going on. And that is a comfort, I think. It is a comfort to know that some things do not change, that there are places where the old ways still hold, where the night still darkens, and the stars still shine, and a man can still guide himself by the North Star across a sea of sand. It is a comfort to know that, thousands of miles from here, in the rolling dunes of the Sahara, a camel caravan is crossing the dark, and that its bells and its songs and its slow, patient footsteps are part of the same great rhythm that has been sounding since the beginning of human time. Let us leave them now as they descend into the next valley of shadow. The last bell fades. The last voice is swallowed by the wind. The night is quiet again, the way it has always been quiet, and we can rest. We can close our eyes. We can let ourselves drift, the way the sand drifts, the way the stars drift, the way all journeys eventually drift into the soft, forgetful arms of sleep. There is nothing more to do tonight. The salt caravan is in the desert, and the desert is in the night, and the night is holding everything in its great, dark, gentle hands. Sleep well. We will follow them again when the stars call in the next part of the story. Perhaps we should take one more look at the road itself before we rest, because the road is not just a path. It is a living thing with its own moods and its own memory. Out there in the empty land, the old caravan routes are not marked by signposts or mile markers. They are worn into the earth by the soft pads of millions of camel feet, by the wooden sledges of the ancient people, by the wheels of the few trucks that have dared to cross this country. In some places, the tracks are so old and so deep that they form long, shallow grooves in the gravel, like the bed of a river that has dried up and left only the memory of movement. If you could stand above the desert and look down, you would see these lines crossing the land like the veins on the back of an old hand, faint but lasting, connecting the wells and the salt mines and the towns. The caravans do not need a map. They follow the old scars. They follow the road that has been there longer than anyone can remember. And the road itself, in its slow, patient way, is a kind of storyteller. Every stone on the path has been turned over by a hoof at some time. Every small patch of ground has been rested upon by a traveler, a man who sat down to eat a little bread and drink a little water, who looked up at the sun or the stars, who thought of his family back in the village, who slept and then walked on. The road remembers all of this, not in words, but in the way it has been packed down, smoothed, shaped by the passage of countless lives. When you walk on an old route like that, you are walking on the efforts of everyone who came before you. You are not alone, even when there is no one in sight. There is a particular place in the desert, east of the route to Tauyudeni, where the rocks are covered in drawings scratched into the stone long ago, before the camels, before the salt trade, before the Berbers and the Arabs and the Tuareg. The drawings show herds of cattle and people swimming, and animals that no longer live anywhere near the desert, giraffes and elephants and rhinoceroses. They show a world that was green, a world with rivers and lakes and tall grass. The people who made those drawings were not nomads crossing a wasteland. They were settled folk who lived in a land of plenty. Their world ended slowly as the rain moved away, as the grass retreated, as the lakes shrank into bitter pools, and then into salt flats. And perhaps it was their descendants who learned to cross the desert, who taught themselves to find the sparse wells, who bred the camels that came from somewhere else and made the crossing possible. The caravan road is the child of that old green world, a memory of a time when the journey was easy. Now the journey is hard, but it is still the same journey. Sometimes, at night, when the wind is blowing from the east, the caravanners say you can smell the old green world. They say there is a faint sweetness in the air, a smell of damp earth and vegetation that comes from very far away, from the countries beyond the Niger, where the grass is tall and the rain is heavy. The men lift their heads and breathe it in, and for a moment they are no longer in the desert. They are home. They are walking through the fields of millet, or wading in the river, or sitting under a baobab tree in a tiny village where the children laugh and the goats bleat. And then the wind shifts, and the smell is gone, and they are back in the dry and the dark. But the memory of that smell stays with them, keeps them going, reminds them why they walk. They are not just carrying salt. They are carrying the promise of a life on the other side of the desert. You may wonder how a man comes to be a caravaner. It is not something you apply for. It is not a job you choose. It is a thing you are born into, the way a boy born in a fishing village learns to read the sea. The small children of the desert towns grow up watching the caravans arrive. They see the camels kneel on the edge of the settlement, the great bundles of salt being lifted down, the tired men stretching their legs and rubbing the dust from their eyes. They learn the names of the wells and the stars. They learn to ride, sitting behind their fathers or their uncles, holding on to the wooden saddle, feeling the strange, swaying gait of the animal beneath them. By the time they are old enough to walk the whole route, they have already walked half of it in their minds. They have dreamed the road, and so the road does not frighten them. But even the most experienced caravaner will tell you that the desert is never fully predictable. It has a way of surprising you. One night, the way forward is clear, the stars bright, the wind steady. The next night, everything is different. The stars are hidden by a high, thin cloud that came from nowhere. The wind turns around and blows into your face, filling your eyes and your nose with grit. The temperature drops, and you pull your blanket tighter, and the camels, which have been walking calmly for hours, suddenly become restless. They snort, they shake their heads, they refuse to go forward. A good guide will stop and listen then, because the animals sense something that the humans cannot yet perceive. Perhaps there is a storm coming. Perhaps there is a flash flood rising in a dry valley that will turn the ground to mud in an instant. Perhaps there is simply a smell of something in the air, a predator, a dead animal, a patch of ground that shifts dangerously underfoot. The camels know. The camels have always known, and the guide, if he is wise, will trust them, will turn the caravan in a different direction, will find a way around the problem that is invisible to him. There is a phrase in the language of the desert people, a saying that goes something like this: the camel is a ship, and the desert is a sea, but the ship must sometimes change its course to survive the storm. The older caravanners tell this to the younger men when they are impatient, when they want to push on through the night, when they think the old ways are too slow. And the younger men listen, because they know that the old men have been on this sea for a long time, and they have learned to read it, not in the way you read a book, but in the way you read a face, a look, a pause in the breathing of the world around you. I remember once reading an account written by a European traveler who joined a salt caravan in the late 1800s, a man who was curious about this strange trade and wanted to see it for himself. He was not a romantic. He was a geographer, a man of measurements and records. But his diary, in a few places, becomes almost poetic, almost unwillingly. He describes the night march in terms that stir the heart. He writes about the feeling of walking through a cool, dark, silent world, of hearing the bells of the camels and the voices of the men, of being unable to see anything but the stars and the faint outline of the dunes. He says that, after a while, he lost all sense of time and distance. He could not tell whether they had been walking for 2 hours or for 10. He was not tired exactly. He was beyond tiredness. He had entered a state he had never known before, a kind of waking trance in which his body moved by itself and his mind floated free, like a bird flying high above the caravan. He wrote that he knew then why the caravanners sang. It was not to pass the time. It was to keep themselves anchored to the world, to keep their minds from drifting away completely into the vastness of the desert and the night. He also wrote, with a kind of wonder, about the manner of walking. The men did not plod. They walked with a rhythm, a swing of the hips, a gentle bend of the knees, a way of stepping that seemed to make the sand bear their weight without effort. They walked as if they were dancing, a slow, endless dance, and the camels followed them with the same movement, the same ease. It was not the walk of a man who wants to reach a destination quickly. It was the walk of a man who has learned that the journey is the destination, that to hurry across the desert is to miss everything that matters about it. The geographer, being a man of measurements, tried to count his steps for a while, but he gave up after a few hundred because the rhythm was too compelling, too much like music, and he found himself just walking as the men did, without counting, without thinking, without wanting to be anywhere else. And he wrote, in the privacy of his diary, that it was one of the most peaceful experiences of his life. What is it about the desert that has this effect on people? I think it is the scale. The desert is so vast that your ordinary concerns seem to shrink. The piece of business you were worrying about, the argument you had with a friend, the small disappointments and irritations of daily life, all of these seem tiny out there, like specks of dust in a great ocean. But at the same time, the desert does not make you feel small in a bad way. It makes you feel part of something large. You are a speck, yes, but you are a speck among billions of other specks, all of them alive, all of them moving, all of them part of the same immense system. The stars are not far away out there in the Sahara. They are close. You can almost feel them above you, like a roof that is about to settle down on your head. And the sand beneath your feet is the same sand that has been there for millions of years, the same grains that were once part of the ancient sea, the same material that has blown across the continent for eons. You are standing on time itself. You are walking through time, and time in the desert is not a straight line. It is a circle. The sun rises, the sun sets, the stars wheel around the pole, the wind blows, the sand shifts, the caravan comes, the caravan goes. It has always been this way. It will always be this way. Perhaps that is why the caravanners are such calm people. They have learned, through generations of walking, that the world is not going to end tomorrow, that the important things will still be there, that there is no need to rush. They have learned to live in a patient rhythm, the rhythm of the camels, the rhythm of the bells, the rhythm of the seasons. A caravan may be delayed by a storm for a week. A well may be dry, and the caravan may have to travel an extra day to reach the next one. A sandstorm may cover the route, and the guide may spend a whole day finding it again. None of this is a catastrophe. It is all part of the journey. The men laugh about it, make tea, tell stories, read the signs, and wait. They know that the desert, like a patient teacher, is trying to teach them something, and the lesson is never urgent, but it is always repeated. There is a kind of music that belongs to the caravan, And it is not the sound of the bells, although the bells are the most beautiful part of it. It is the sound of the men talking in the night, their voices low and soft, as if they do not want to disturb the darkness. They talk about everything and nothing. They talk about the price of salt in Timbuktu. They talk about the health of their camels, about the weather, about the news that came with a traveler from the north. They share stories that have been passed down for generations, stories of heroes and clever animals, stories of love and loss, stories that are told not because they are new, but because they are old and familiar and comforting. And now and then, one of them will laugh. It is not a loud laugh. It is a quiet, warm laugh, a laugh that comes from the belly and spreads through the group like the warmth of the fire. And you hear that laugh drifting across the night. And you know that these men, despite the hardship, despite the dust, and the thirst, and the long miles, are at peace. They have found their place in the world, and their place is here, on this road, in this dark, with these companions. There is a story about the first salt caravan, the very first time that men loaded salt onto camels and set out across the desert. It is not a story with a date or a name. It is a legend, and like all legends, it has many versions. But the version I like best goes something like this. Long ago, in a village at the edge of the desert, a man was sitting under a tree, and he was sad. He was sad because the people of his village were sick. They were weak. They lay on their mats and could not work, could not hunt, could not dance, could not even smile. And the man did not know why. He looked at the sky, he looked at the river, he looked at the food they ate, and he saw nothing wrong. But the people were sick. And so the man walked into the desert, walking without a destination, walking because he could not stay still, walking to find an answer. He walked for many days alone until he came to a great white plain that shimmered in the heat. And he walked onto that plain, and he saw that it was not water. It was not snow. It was salt, laid out like a shining blanket as far as the eye could see. And the man broke off a piece of the salt and tasted it. And he knew in his body that this was the answer. He took the salt back to his village. He gave it to the sick people. They ate it, and they grew strong again, and they danced again, and they smiled again. And the man knew that he would have to go back to the white plain again and again to bring the salt to his people. He needed an animal to carry it. He had a camel. He loaded the camel with the salt. He walked beside it on the long road home. And as he walked, he hummed. He hummed a little tune, a tune of thankfulness and wonder. And the camel, patient as camels are, walked on. And that was the first caravan. It is a simple story, but I like it because it is not really about salt. It is about noticing. It is about a man who was willing to walk far outside his world, to be alone, to be lost, in order to find the thing that would save the people he loved. That is what the caravanners still do in their own way. They are willing to be away from home, away from comfort, away from everything familiar, to bring back the thing that the people need. They are not heroes in the loud sense of the word. They do not wear capes or fly through the air. They simply walk, and they carry, and they return, and they do it again, year after year, until they are too old and their sons take their place. That is a kind of heroism that does not make the headlines. It is the quiet heroism of ordinary people doing an extraordinary thing, and doing it not once, but over and over, without complaint, without expectation of reward, without any desire to be remembered. And yet they are remembered. They are remembered in the songs, in the stories, in the bells, in the road itself. And now, as we come to the end of this long, slow wandering, I want to return to the image of the caravan that we left earlier. The moon has set. The stars are at their brightest. The caravan is moving through a broad, flat valley, a place where the sand has been swept clean by the wind, leaving a surface smooth as a table. The camels walk in single file, their long shadows stretching out ahead of them, made by the light of the stars. The bells ring, the men sing, and at the very front of the line, walking slightly apart from the others, is the guide. He is an old man, but his legs are still strong. He walks with a staff, not because he needs it for support, but because it is his custom, his companion. He does not look back. He knows the caravan is behind him. He looks forward into the dark, and he sees what others cannot see. He sees the route in his mind, the shape of the land, the position of the stars, the memory of all the nights he has walked before. He is not lost. He has never been lost, not really. He has been delayed. He has been surprised. He has been turned around. But he has always found his way, because the way is not something you find once and keep forever. It is something you find every time, for as long as you need it. There is a moment when the guide stops and raises his staff. The caravan stops behind him. The camels, patient as ever, stand quietly. The men are silent, and for a long moment there is no sound at all except the wind and the distant breathing of the animals. The guide is listening. He is not listening for anything specific. He is simply listening, the way you listen to the quiet of a house when everyone else is asleep. He is letting the desert tell him where he is and where to go next. And after a time, he is satisfied. He lowers his staff. He takes a step forward, and then another, and the caravan follows. And the bells begin again, and the sand sighs beneath the camels' feet, and the night wraps around them all, warm and dark and endless. We have been with them for a long time now, but our time is ending. The night is far gone. The first hint of gray is appearing in the east, a small change in the darkness, a sign that the world is turning toward the day. The men see it. They know that when the sun rises, the caravan will stop, the camels will be unloaded, and the travelers will lie down in the shade of their blankets and sleep through the heat of the day. They are tired, but their tiredness is a good tiredness. The tiredness of work done well, of miles covered, of a night spent under the stars. And as the light grows just a little, they sing one last song, a song of the dawn, a song of thanks for the night and for the day, a song of home. The camels walk on. The salt is still heavy on their backs. The road is still ahead. But for this moment, at the edge of the morning, everything is complete. And you, listening in your quiet room, have traveled with them. You have walked through the sand. You have heard the bells. You have tasted the bitter and the sweet tea. You have seen the stars turning overhead. You are tired too, in a good way, in the way of a person who has finished a long and gentle journey and is ready to rest. So let the caravan go on without you now. Let it walk into the pale light of the dawn and out of our sight. The bells fade, the voices fade, the sand covers the tracks, and all that is left is the quiet, the softness, the feeling of a story that will still be there, waiting for you on another night when the stars call again. Sleep well then. Sleep deeply. The desert is at peace, and you are at peace, and the journey is not over, but it is resting, and you may rest with it. Good night. Good night. And yet, even as you settle deeper into your pillow, there is a part of you that is still awake, still wandering, still curious. That is the part I want to speak to now. Not with urgency, and not with any great announcement, but with the softness of a voice that has been telling stories for a very long time. Because the truth is, the story of the salt caravans does not end at the edge of the morning. It does not end at all. It has been going on for more than 1,000 years, and it will still be going on in some form, long after we have both forgotten this night and this conversation. The road is that old, the camels are that patient, and the salt, the white gold, the gift of the ancient sea, lies still in the desert, waiting to be lifted up and carried home. Let me tell you about the salt itself, because we have been walking with it, but we have not really looked at it. Imagine a time before the desert was a desert. Imagine a great ocean, warm and shallow, covering the land that we now call the Sahara. It stretched for miles and miles, and in its waters swam creatures that we would not recognize, tiny and huge, with shells and spines and soft, strange bodies. And over millions of years, those creatures died, and their bodies drifted down to the floor of that ocean, layering upon layering, until the ocean itself began to dry up, to shrink, to vanish, leaving behind a vast basin of mineral and stone. And in that basin, buried beneath the sand and the rock, were the remains of that ancient sea, compressed and crystallized into salt. Not the little grains you might sprinkle on your dinner, but great slabs, great tablets, some of them as thick as a man's arm, some of them gleaming white or gray or pink, depending on the minerals that mingled with them. When you hold a piece of that salt in your hand, you are holding a memory of the sea. You are holding the bones of creatures that lived when the world was young, and the people of the Sahel, the lands to the south of the desert, they knew that hunger for salt that is so hard to explain to someone who has never known it. Salt is not a luxury to them. It is not a garnish. It is life. In the heat of the south, where the rains fall and the rivers run, the body loses salt so quickly that a person can become weak, confused, unable to work, unable to think. The food they eat, the millet, the vegetables, the occasional meat, it is not enough to replace what the heat takes away. They need salt the way a fire needs air. And so, from the south, they looked north, across the terrible emptiness, and they knew that out there, beyond the dunes and the rocky plateaus and the burning emptiness of the day, there was a place where salt lay on the ground like snow. And they began to go and get it. The first caravans were probably small. A few men, a few camels, a few slabs of salt tied onto the animals' backs. But as the centuries passed, the caravans grew. They became organized. They became a way of life. There's a name for the great northward journey that the Tuareg and the Berber traders make to the salt mines of Taoudeni. They call it the Azalai. It is a word that means, roughly, the journey of the salt, the trek of the white slabs, and it is a word that carries with it all the weight of tradition and endurance. The Azalai is not a single journey. It is a rhythm, a pulse, like the heartbeat of the desert itself. Each year, at the end of the rainy season, when the heat has loosened its grip just a little, the caravans form. They gather in the towns of the Sahel, in places like Timbuktu, and they load their camels with food, with water, with ropes and blankets and tools. And then they set out, across 200 miles or more of open desert, to the place where the salt is. It takes them weeks. They travel at night, as we have seen, to escape the ferocity of the sun. They sleep through the day, crammed into the shade of their own bodies and the thin canvas of their tents. They live on dates and millet and the strongest, sweetest tea you can imagine. And when they reach the mines, they do not rest for long. They dig. They cut the salt into slabs, each slab about the size of a door, or a large table, flat and heavy, weighing maybe 100 pounds or more. They load these slabs onto the camels, 2 per camel, 1 on each side, balanced carefully, tied with ropes of twisted leather or palm fiber. And then they turn south, and they begin the journey back, carrying the white gold to the markets where the people wait. I want you to imagine, for a moment, the weight of those slabs. 100 pounds, maybe more. The camels carry this weight for weeks, through the heat and the cold of the desert nights, over sand and stone and gravel, with little to eat and less to drink. And the men walk beside them, carrying their own loads, their own responsibilities, their own exhaustion. It is a hard life. There is no glamour in it, no romance in the way that a person sitting in a comfortable room might imagine. The romance is there, of course, but it is a quiet romance, a romance of small moments. The first sip of water after a long march, the warmth of a fire in the cold hour before dawn, the sound of a familiar voice singing an old song, the sight of the moon rising over the dunes. It is the romance of endurance. It is the romance of people who know exactly who they are and what they are doing, and who do not need the approval or the admiration of anyone else. Some of the travelers on the Azalai are merchants. They own the camels, they own the salt. They will sell the salt when they reach the market, and they will use the money to buy other goods, which they will carry back to the desert on the next journey. But many of the travelers are not merchants. They are hired men, workers, salt loaders, camel handlers. Some of them are descendants of the slaves who once carried the salt on their own backs, before the camels were so numerous, and the memory of that harder, older time is still woven into the fabric of the caravans. They are men who are paid a small amount for a journey of many weeks, men who sleep on the ground and eat the simplest food, and ask for nothing more than a full water skin and a place to rest. They are quiet men, for the most part, though though they are not silent. They joke, they complain, they sing. They pass the time with stories and riddles, and the endless, rhythmic commentary of men who have walked a long way and know that the only way to finish is to keep going. There is a particular sound that a camel makes when it is loaded and ready to move. It is not a happy sound, and it is not an unhappy sound. It is a sound of resignation, of acceptance, of a creature that has learned, over a very long life, that the ropes will be tightened, the weight will be laid on, and the walking will begin, and there is no point in arguing. It is a low, grumbling sound, like a complaint delivered through the nose, and it is followed by the creaking of the saddle and the soft thud of the animal's feet on the sand. The men listen for this sound. It tells them that they are ready. It tells them that the caravan is alive again after the stillness of the day's sleep, and that the night's work is about to begin. And what work it is! Let me tell you about the loading of a caravan, because it is a ritual that has been repeated so many times that every movement, every knot, every adjustment has been refined over generations. The camels are brought in, one by one. They kneel. They are grumbling, as camels always grumble, but they kneel. The men approach, and they begin to lay out the saddle, the pad, the ropes. The saddle itself is a work of art, a wooden frame with a high pommel and a high cantle, built to distribute the weight of the load evenly across the camel's back. The pad comes first, a thick quilted blanket that protects the animal's skin from the friction of the wood. The saddle is placed on top. The ropes are thrown over, and the men begin the delicate work of tightening, of balancing, of making sure that the load will not shift, not slip, not rub, not cause the camel a single moment of unnecessary pain. A good loader can load a camel in a way that is almost tender. His hands move over the animal's body with a practiced gentleness, checking for sores, for tenderness, for any sign of trouble. The camel, for its part, submits to this inspection with the patience of a creature that knows what is coming and has decided to accept it. Then comes the salt itself. The slabs are big. They are heavy. They are carried to the camel by two men, one at each end, their arms straining, their feet sinking into the sand. They lift the slab and rest it against the saddle, and then they tip it carefully onto the frame, onto the ropes, onto the pad, until it is in place. And then they do the same on the other side, until the camel's back is a symmetrical load. One slab to the left, one slab to the right, held together by a system of ropes and knots that looks simple, but is in fact a feat of engineering perfected over centuries. When the loading is done, the men stand back. They survey their work. They tug on a rope here, a strap there, they nod. And the camel, released from the men's hands, heaves itself to its feet with a long, sliding motion, and the whole caravan feels that movement, that shift, that readiness. It is time to go. I want to tell you about a man I heard about, a caravan guide from a town near Timbuktu, who had been making the salt journey since he was a boy of 10. His name, as it was told to me, was City. Or maybe it was not City. Maybe it was Amadou or Almer or Ibrahim. The names in these stories are interchangeable because the story is the same, whatever the name. This man, let us call him Sidi, was small and wiry, with a face like a nut and eyes that looked as if they had been borrowed from a hawk. He had made the journey so many times that he had stopped counting. The desert was not a mystery to him. It was his garden, his workshop, his home. He knew the way not as a line on a map, but as a feeling in his feet, a taste in the air, a set of stars that wheeled overhead in the same order every night. He did not walk quickly. There was no need. The desert does not reward speed. It rewards patience, consistency, the ability to keep going when everything in your body is telling you to stop. And so Sidi walked at the same pace, hour after hour, mile after mile, a pace that looked slow and easy, and was, in fact, the only pace that could carry him all the way to the salt and back again. He had a staff, as the guide in our story did. He had a camel who had walked beside him for many years, a camel with a white patch on its left shoulder, and a habit of sighing deeply whenever it was asked to do anything. Sidi loved that camel. He sometimes spoke to it in the low, murmuring language that camel men share with their animals, a language of clicks and clucks and soft nonsense sounds. He did not expect the camel to answer. The camel did not expect to answer. But the sounds passed between them, and somehow the walking went easier. On the long nights, Sidi would sometimes recite poetry. He had a few poems memorized, old poems from the desert, poems about separation and reunion, about loss and love, about the moon and the sand, and the endless patience of the stars. His voice was not beautiful. It was cracked, a little dry, like the ground around him. But when he sang, the other men would quiet down, and the camels would seem to listen, and the caravan would move through the darkness as if it were a single living thing, a long, slow creature of rope and salt and memory, carrying its cargo across a forgotten sea. There is a certain hour of the night, somewhere between midnight and the first gray of morning, when the desert becomes completely still. The wind drops. The sand settles. The animals stop grumbling. And there is a silence so deep that it feels as if the world has stopped turning, as if you and the caravan are suspended in a moment that has always existed and will never end. It is in this hour that the night travelers sometimes hear things, not loudly, not clearly, but there are sounds out there in the desert that do not have an easy explanation. A distant hum like the strings of a lute. A call half human, half bird that seems to come from nowhere and goes nowhere. The old men say that these are the voices of the ones who went before, the forgotten caravans, the travelers who did not make it to the well, the ones who lie still beneath the sand with their secret maps and their empty water skins. They are not malicious, those voices. They are not trying to lure anyone astray. They are simply singing the same songs they sang when they were alive. And if you listen very carefully, you might hear a strain of an old tune that you half remember. A tune from a time before you were born. A tune that says, "We are here. We are still here. Do not forget us. Do not forget us." That is the message of the desert, always. The desert remembers everything. It remembers the rivers that once ran through it, the forests that once shaded it, the elephants and the lions and the giraffes that once wandered where now only the camels and the goats can survive. It remembers the cities that were built and then swallowed by the sand, the libraries of books that crumbled to dust, the kings whose palaces were the wonders of their age. And it remembers the caravans, every single one, from the first small band of frightened men who walked out into the emptiness with nothing but their faith and their thirst, to the great processions of 100 camels that crossed the desert in the golden age of the Mali Empire. The desert does not distinguish between large and small, grand and humble. It keeps them all in its layers, in its winds, in the stories that are told around the fires, and then retold, slightly different each time, so that no two tellings are ever quite the same. There is a place called Chingti in what is now Mauritania. It is a town that was once a great center of learning, a place where scholars gathered to study astronomy and law and the poetry of the ancient Arabs. It is almost gone now, mostly sand, a skeleton of old stone walls and a few crumbling libraries whose windows look out over a vast and empty horizon. But if you go to Chingti and you ask the old men who sit in the shade of the ruined mosques, they will tell you that the caravans still pass sometimes. Not the big caravans of the old days, with all their hundreds of camels and their flags and their days of celebration. The big caravans are gone, but the smaller ones, the quiet ones, the ones that carry just enough salt to keep a village fed, they still come. They come out of the north, out of the deep desert, and the people of Chingti can hear them before they see them. The bells. It is the bells that carry across the dunes, the little brass bells that hang around the necks of the lead camels, and the deeper, darker bells that hang on the flanks of the pack animals. The sound is not musical in the way that a song is musical. It is more like a heartbeat, a pulse, a reminder that something alive is moving out there in the emptiness. And when the old men hear it, they stop talking, and they turn their heads to the north, and they listen. And for a moment, they are young again, and they are walking with the caravan, and the salt is on their backs, and the stars are overhead, and the world is wide and full of wonder. Let me tell you about the tea. You may have heard about the tea of the desert and how important it is. It is not a small thing, the tea. It is a ceremony, a ritual, a way of marking the passage of time and the bonds between men. When the caravan stops, even for a short rest, the first thing that happens, after the camels are settled and the loads are checked, is that the fire is lit. It is a small fire, just enough to boil water, and the water is boiled in a small, blackened kettle that has been used so many times that it has its own character, its own memory, its own flavor. And into the water goes the tea, green tea, loose and coarse, and a great deal of sugar, because the tea of the desert is sweet, sweet enough to coat the tongue and warm the belly and keep thirst at bay. The first glass is poured. It is strong. It has a bitterness that makes you wince, just a little. The men drink it quickly, in 3 gulps, as is the custom. The second glass is softer, sweeter, more mellow. The third glass is the sweetest of all, and it is drunk slowly, in the company of friends, with no hurry, because the tea is not just a drink. It is a way of saying, we are here, we are alive, we have made it through the night, and we have each other. And when the third glass is finished, the men lie back, and they look up at the stars, and they are content. There is a story that the Tuareg tell about the tea, about how the drink came to the desert. They say that a man was traveling alone, lost and exhausted, and he came to a cave where an old man lived. The old man gave him shelter and food and water. And then, when the traveler was rested, the old man brought out a small packet of leaves and a lump of sugar and a little brass pot. He made tea. He poured it into a glass, and he handed it to the traveler. And the traveler drank, and the weariness fell away from him like a heavy cloak. The traveler asked the old man how he could ever repay him. And the old man said, "Tell no one where I am, and tell everyone about the tea." So the traveler went on his way, and he told everyone he met about the tea, and the story spread across the desert. And wherever the traveler went, people would make tea the way the old man had taught him, with 3 glasses, each one gentler than the last. And in this way, the gift of the old man was shared with the world. It is a simple story. It may not be true in the literal sense, but it is true in the way that matters, because the tea is a gift, and gifts are meant to be shared. And the desert is a place where sharing is not a luxury, but a necessity, a way of survival, a way of saying, we are all in this together, and we will not let each other perish. The salt caravans were not only about salt, they were about connection. They were about the threads that tied the north of Africa to the south, the Berber lands to the African kingdoms, the Muslim scholars to the pagan priests, the desert to the savannah, the salt to the gold. In the old days, when the caravans came down from the Sahara, loaded with salt and dates and textiles and books, they would meet the caravans coming up from the south, loaded with gold, with ivory, with slaves, with pepper and kola nuts and ostrich feathers. And they would trade not with money, but with barter, with haggling, with long negotiations conducted over tea and shared meals. The famous gold of West Africa, the gold that made the kings of Mali some of the richest men in history, flowed north along these same routes, and salt flowed south. It is said that in the markets of the Sahel, salt was traded for gold, weight for weight, ounce for ounce. So precious was the white mineral to the people of the South. Imagine that. Imagine holding a slab of salt in one hand and a slab of gold in the other, and knowing that they were of equal value. It is hard for us to understand, we who can buy salt at the corner store for a few coins. But there are places in the world where salt is still a treasure, where it is guarded and measured and given as a gift at weddings and births, where the phrase, "he eats salt with us," means he is a friend, a member of the family, someone who shares the most basic and essential element of a meal. The caravans were the veins of that world, carrying life from one region to another. And the men who walked beside the camels were the blood cells, the carriers, the humble servants of a vast and ancient system. They did not think of themselves as important. They did not expect to be remembered. They did the work, took the payment, ate the food, drank the tea, and lay down to sleep under the stars, and the world went on. But the world would not have gone on without them. The cities of the Sahel, the kingdoms of Ghana and Mali and Songhai, all of them depended on the salt, and the salt depended on the caravans, and the caravans depended on the camels, and the camels depended on the men who knew how to handle them, how to load them, how to find the wells, how to survive the crossings. It is a chain of dependence that reaches back 1,000 years, and at every link there is a person, a hand, a foot, a face, a voice, a life that was not lived in the spotlight, but was lived with dignity and purpose, and a certain quiet stubbornness. I think about the camels sometimes, and the lives they live. A camel can live for 40 years or more. Some say 50. That is a long time to spend walking. The camels of the Azalai are born in the desert, or in the villages at its edge, and they are raised by the caravanners from the time they are small. A baby camel, a calf, is an awkward and endearing creature, all legs and wobble and confusion. It follows its mother everywhere, and it learns, gradually, the rhythms of the road. It learns to walk in single file. It learns to carry a load. It learns to drink deeply and rarely, to survive on thorny scrub and dry grass, to endure the heat and the cold and the blowing sand. When a young camel is first loaded, it often protests. It cries. It stumbles. It tries to roll over and dislodge the strange weight on its back, but the handlers are patient. They do not punish. They simply reassure with their voices and their hands. And after a while, the camel accepts its fate. And from then on, it carries the salt year after year until it is too old and the caravan leaves it behind at one of the desert wells to live out its last days in a place where there is water and a little shade and no more loads to carry. I wonder if the camel feels relief or sadness or just the simple acceptance of a creature that does not think about the past or the future. And I wonder if the old men, the caravanners who have also made their last journey, feel the same when they sit by the side of the road and watch the younger men and the younger camels go on without them. Perhaps they do. Perhaps there is a peace in knowing that you have done your part, that the story continues, that you can rest. We have come a long way together, you and I, on this night. We have crossed the desert. We have heard the bells. We have drunk the tea. We have walked with the men, and we have walked with the camels. And now, the night is truly ending. The stars are fading, one by one, as if someone is going along with a gentle finger and smudging them out. The sky is turning from black to deep blue to a pale, pearly gray. The air is cool, but it will not be cool for long. Soon the sun will be up, and the heat will pour down, and the desert will become a furnace once again. But the caravan, this caravan, the one we have been walking with, has found its place of rest. The guide has seen it from a long way off, a cluster of low, dark shapes on the horizon, and he has led the caravan toward them. They are the rocks the acacia trees, the dry water courses that mark the edge of the habitable land. And in among them, there are a few tents, a few goats, a few children who have woken early to watch the camels come in. The children wave. The men raise their hands in greeting. The camels, smelly and tired and heavy with salt, plod toward the shade. The unloading will begin soon. There will be tea. There will be stories. There will be sleep. And you, in your quiet room, you feel the journey settling into your bones. You are not a caravaner. You have a different road to walk, a different load to carry, a different dawn to meet. But for this one night, you have shared the path. You have understood, in a small and humble way, what it means to cross a desert, not with speed or with force, but with patience and faith and the company of a few good souls. And that understanding, that quiet feeling of having been somewhere else, is a gift. It will stay with you a little when you wake. You will think of the bells, perhaps, or the taste of sweet tea, or the image of an old man with a staff looking up at the stars and knowing exactly where he is and where he is going. And if on some other night you find yourself standing outside under a sky full of stars, and you hear a sound that is almost like a distant bell, and you see a shape moving out there at the very edge of sight, do not be afraid. It is just the caravan. It is still crossing. It is still carrying the salt from the ancient sea to the people who need it. It is still walking slowly, patiently, into the dawn. And you may walk with it for a little while in your imagination, and then you may turn back and go home and rest. Good night, then, once more. Good night to the camels and the bells, and the men with their staffs and their songs. Good night to the salt and the sand and the slow turn of the stars. Good night to the road and the journey and the quiet peace of a story that has no end. The desert is dark. The desert is still. And you, safe in your place, are drifting down, down, down into the soft and dreaming dark. Sleep, sleep well. The caravan is gone now, but it will be here again, on the edge of your dreams, whenever you need it. Sleep, and let the night carry you gently home.